Hi, I'm Alasdair Post-Quinn from Falling Blocks Designs. I've been developing double knitting techniques and designing patterns for over 20 years and have helped thousands of knitters like you learn and expand their knowledge of double knitting. In 2022 and 2023, I ran a series of recorded virtual workshops, and I'm now releasing those recordings for free. Why? Check the blog post I've linked below. You'll also find a handout for this workshop and some other useful links. Please note, this recording is from a live recorded virtual workshop, so it's not as polished or concise as a tutorial made for this format might normally be. As I have time, I may choose to re-record some of these workshops. Without further ado, please enjoy.
Okay, so I am Alasdair Post-Quinn, and this is Intro to Double Knitting, and I'm going to start off with just a little slideshow, just a few things about me and my work. So you can find me at double-knitting.com. Of course, you all know that because you had to enroll there. Other places you can find me, my blog, my Facebook page, my Ravelry page, my mailing list. Again, the mailing list you should have had the opportunity to sign up for when you bought the workshop, and my Patreon. All of this stuff, by the way, of course, is linked from the website. So if you get nothing else off this slide, double-knitting.com will take you everywhere else. I've written a couple of books. Extreme Double Knitting was the first. The original edition came out in 2011. The revised edition, which you can see the cover of here, came out in 2018. The rights to the book came back into my hands in about 2016, right after I finished the other book that came out in between the two editions. Both of these, by the way, are well suited to beginners, but the learning curve is much steeper, or at least somewhat steeper, in Double or Nothing, because it is, of course, a snapshot of where I was in my knitting repertoire 5 or 6 years later. But both of them start at the basics. I've also got some standalone patterns as well. The Parallax collection, by the way, has the first 3 patterns are all intro level. Anything you get in physical form from my website will come with a free PDF download. My apologies to Leslie. I currently can't sell to the UK because of the whole VAT thing. It's next to impossible for people outside, small businesses outside of the UK to deal with, or the EU. So so it's digital only for you folks. I very much apologize. So anyway, back to this view, and I'm going to do a little show and tell of some double knitting pieces that you will have all the skills you need in order to do after you've done this workshop. And we're going to start off with the Corvus scarf. So this is Corvus. This is the very first pattern that I ever designed in double knitting, and it's still a very good example of the basic concept. As you can see, we have a motif on a background, and on the other layer we have the same motif in opposite colors and opposite orientation. So every time we're using color A, the light color, on the front layer, we're using color B, the dark color, on the back, and vice versa. So what this gets you is actually, unlike, say, brioche, which is another potentially 2-color reversible fabric, this gets you 2 separate layers of fabric. You can see I can separate the crow out up until the colors change. So the fabric links together at the color changes within a row. The fabric also links together at the edges using something called a linked pair. And there's a point right around here where my sample knitter for this piece forgot a few of those. So this is a good example of why you want to make sure to link your edges, because otherwise you get a hole. And B, you can also see in this case that there are purl sides facing each other on the inside of the work, so that there are knit sides facing out. And if we had, if this was here in, or if you were here in person, you'd be able to take this and stick your finger inside, and you can feel the color changes along the inside of the work, which isn't something you normally get to do. Unfortunately, I can't offer that to you right now. So if you only had the linked pairs along the edges and it was just a plain colored scarf with no motif, no other color work, you'd end up with a big tube that would be very likely to roll off center. And so we put in motifs, obviously for aesthetic purposes, but also to keep the fabric stable. And so, you know, from the head of this crow to the head of the other one on the other side of the piece, we have this walking crow's foot motif that is, again, partially there to keep the fabric stable and partially just to relieve the boredom of doing 5 feet of double stockinette with no color changing. So that's Corvus. It's the first pattern out of my book, Extreme Double Knitting, but it is also a free pattern on Ravelry. It was the first thing I ever released, and it was released for free at that point and is still free. So if that's the only thing out of the book that you want, you don't need to buy the book. My hope is, of course, that you will find interest in some of the other patterns. Here's another one that, again, you'll have all the skills you need in order to do after you've done this workshop. There is one thing in the workshop that is not, it's not explicitly in the workshop, but I almost always have time to explain it. Which is the Selvedge. It's a cleaner edge. By default, I teach this workshop without the Selvedge because it's not necessary to learn the technique. But I almost always have time to add it in toward the 5th row or so. So you can transfer your edges from non-Selvedge to Selvedge. So anyway, this is a parallax, one of the parallax scarves. This is parallax 0.5. I give them version numbers rather than names so that I don't have to come up with a new name for each one. There are 5 of them, technically 6, although one of them isn't released. The first 3, as I mentioned earlier, are all intro level pieces. They're just done at different gauges. So this is 0.5. This is easier to do than the Corvus scarf. And the reason that I say that is that once you've set up the color changes at the very beginning, they're in exactly the same place every row beyond that, as you can see from the vertical lines. So those 2 pieces are done. Oh, and the parallax, by the way, that one is available both as a standalone pattern because it was the first parallax that I released, and it is also part of the parallax collection if you want more of them. So those are flat. I'm going to show you a couple in the round. This is called Bipolar. It's a cowl. This is a really great place to start also. Because there's not a lot of color changing in it. Big blocks of color mean that you can sort of tile this as you like to make it whatever size you want for the size of yarn you've chosen. This particular one is in a DK weight. It's also very forgiving in terms of color choices. You can get away with either low or high contrast because the big blocks of color allow for low contrast to look, you know, just as good potentially. So this is just a standalone pattern. It is currently not in any book. Same goes for this one, another cowl called Severn Thicket, made out of sort of a simplified version of the Twin Trees 2 out of the Barbara Walker Treasuries, sort of simplified in that it is no longer made out of cables, and then tiled with the trees to either side, so it becomes an actual little copse of trees. Also standalone pattern. I'm going to show 2 more pieces that are both flat, but these are brand new, just came out. They are also intro level though. So this is called Tendrils. And it's done in one gradient and one solid in the Rowan felted tweed and Rowan felted tweed color, which is a new gradient line. So that's tendrils. And then the other one that literally just came out 2 days ago, and I haven't even publicized on Facebook. It's just been posted to Ravelry and stuck on my website, and it'll get posted out to my mailing list, etc. Is called Vesica, and this is Vesica. It's a huge piece. It's 10 to 10.5 inches wide, because I needed the detail. I needed the amount of detail to get the pattern that I wanted. Sort of a seed of life, sacred geometry thing, but extended. So it's this long version of it. So, yeah. So all of that stuff is intro level. It's all quite large, but it's all intro level. And I actually recommend that once you've learned this, in order to not lose it as quickly, do something big. Do something that's a scarf, a cowl, a baby blanket, a dozen pot holders. I don't know. Something that has that will get the muscle memory down for you, because that's what you're really going to need to make this feel natural for you. It may feel a little unnatural, but a larger item will help it feel more natural. Okay, so I'm going to switch modes again to my hand camera, and you should all have the handout, or the last page of the handout. You don't need the entire thing. You don't need it printed either. You could have it up on a screen. It's up to you. Really, all you need is this sheet. The rest of the handout is really just there to remind you of things that you will have learned after this workshop. And of course, you need 2 colors of yarn as well. So I'm going to switch to the hand camera. And you're going to need these 2 colors of yarn. Your light color is going to be your color A. Your dark color is going to be your color B. That's at least how I refer to them. And you're going to, of course, also need a needle. I use a circular needle. You can use whatever you like. It's not a very big piece. Straights or circulars will work fine. The only place it makes any difference is in the bind off, but there's a way around it. So we'll get there when we get there. So let's get started. We can't get to the bind off until we've done cast on and a bunch of other stuff. So I'm going to have you do a slip knot with both yarns held together. Oops, sorry. Just move my camera over. There we go. So a slip knot with both yarns held together. Doesn't matter what order they go onto the needle in, because we're going to remove that slip knot at the end of the first row. And this is just a slip knot with a couple of short tails. We don't actually need to have them any longer. We are going to be using the active ends of yarn. Now, it's my hope that some of you got a chance to watch the cast on video. But there are always some who did not, so I want to still go through it here. That said, there is a video. If you don't want to have to go to this video to see this, there's one on YouTube that you're welcome to use, and that should be linked from the email that you got earlier. So in order to get into the position we need our hands in, this is going to be similar to the long tail cast on, which is worked like this. But in order to get to that position, you just need your dark color facing away from you, your light color facing toward you. Take your thumb and forefinger and stick them in between. Grab the hanging ends, separate your thumb and forefinger, and then pull down so that you get this Y shape. In general, you should have the slip knot and then the 2 yarns coming in between your thumb and forefinger, wrapping around each so that the light color wraps around your thumb and the dark wraps around your finger. And you're probably going to want that finger strand up on the second joint if you can, and not all the way down here, because A, it's a little easier to keep the tension on it, and B, you are actually going to need to get access to this strand back here. So if you hide it down in the crook of your finger, you're not going to easily be able to access it. So we're going to start off with a standard move, which if you are experienced with a long tail cast on, you already know how to do. We're going to take the needle and bring it in front of everything, up through the triangle at the base of the thumb, grab the first finger strand you encounter, pass it back through the thumb loop, drop the thumb loop, grab a new one from underneath and tighten. That should give you one dark loop on the needle. Then we're going to do the same thing in almost reverse. We're going to take the needle and we're going to bring it behind everything, up through the triangle at the base of the finger. And we're going to then reach underneath the first thumb strand we encounter, like this. Once it's on the needle, we're going to pass it back through the finger loop all the way to the back, drop the finger, and tighten. So I'm going to do those two again slowly without commentary, and then I'm going to explain a little bit more about them, and then we'll do more of those. And you want 13 pairs. This is a pair, one color of, or one stitch of one color, one stitch of the other. In this case, it's a BA pair. So you want B on first and then A. You want 13 of these. Don't count the slip knot. Okay, so again, forward long tail move like this, then reverse like this. So, and I'll do more of these, don't worry. The forward long tail move, as I mentioned, is called a long tail move, although there is no long tail. This is what people are used to, what many people are used to thinking of as a long tail cast on move. So that's what I refer to it as. The reverse one, a couple of quick things to make this a little easier for you, perhaps. If you are having trouble trying to figure out exactly where to put your needle for this first insertion here, if you think about your finger, the finger that has this loop over it, think about your finger as a knitting needle. This motion is like purling through the back of the loop. So, like purling through the back of the loop, you insert your needle that way. And then you're going to grab this strand from underneath. The reason you don't grab it like this, which is an exact mirror image of the other one, is that this seats the resulting loop on the needle backwards, which makes it twisted. If you grab it like this, it makes it untwisted. So this is the way we prefer to pick it up. Once you've got that on the needle, you're going to pass your needle back through the finger loop all the way to the back. And it helps if you sort of crook the finger forward when you do this, because it opens the loop and makes it easy to pass the needle through, but also leaves the loop at the front where when you drop your finger or drop it off your finger, it's less likely to catch on the needle and give you another false loop. As far as tension goes, I recommend that you keep this a little tighter than you normally would, but if you haven't or didn't, don't worry about it. You may find that this cast on, even though it feels tight in the first row, loosens up quite nicely once there's more knitting on top of it. So I've done 3 pairs. I'm going to do a couple more without commentary, and then I'm going to speed it up and finish my 13. If this cast on is too weird for you for any reason, you are welcome to use any cast on you like with both yarns held together. That will still get you pairs of stitches to work with. The edge won't look as nice, but at least you will be able to go on with the meat of the workshop. Okay, so that's 2, 6, 8. Okay, so I need 5 more. So I'm just going to speed it up. Again, if you have any questions or need any help, please feel free to toss it in the chat. And if you've got this down, you just, as I mentioned, need 13 pairs or 26 total stitches, depending on how you're counting them, not counting the slip knot. Here, did one extra. $10, $12, $13. So it's 13. You can see it's not very long. It will lengthen somewhat once it has some knitting on top of it. Okay. So as I mentioned, we started with the color B. And so we have BA pairs. So since you're just doing BA pairs all the way across, you're starting with B and ending with A. If you haven't ended with A, double check your count. Make sure that you actually have a full number of pairs and not a half pair. If you started with A by mistake, you can just add one extra stitch at the end so that you're beginning with A. You'll begin with A and end with A, but actually you'll end with B, but just drop off one stitch plus the slip knot. Hopefully that hasn't happened to anyone, but the cast on won't look nearly as nice because essentially you'll be knitting into purls and purling into knits, but at least it will be stable and you don't have to redo the cast on. All right, so assuming that everybody's got what I have or something very close to it, you should, when you turn it over, start with the light color, color A. Now, for the first 2 rows, I am not going to be referring to the chart, and I'm not going to give you a whole lot of theory right off the bat, because I don't want you to have to overthink this, and I don't need you to have to follow the chart when there's nothing in the chart. I will bring the chart in just to illustrate what I mean. The first 2 rows don't have any color work in them. So really all you have to do here is learn the basic concepts of double knitting without any color changing. So I'm going to take you through those. And then when we get into row 3, I'll bring in the chart and talk about how we follow that and how to integrate color work into your double knitting. So as I said, I'm not going to give you a lot of theory. I'm going to give you just some basic instructions on how to do this row. And as we get further into it, I'll give you more theory. So for this row, I just want you to start off with a knit in color A. So we're just going to be matching the row, or matching the color that we are knitting into for the moment. So knit 1 with color A. Don't worry about what color B is doing for that one stitch. Then you're going to bring both yarns to the front, in between the needles. And then you're going to purl 1 with B. You're purling into B with B, just matching the color you already have on the needle. Then yarns to the back again. Knit 1 in A. Yarns to the front. Purl 1 in B. So it's very much like one-by-one ribbing in terms of the motions that you have to go through, but the knit and the purl are from separate strands, which means that you are ending up with, rather than a single fabric which is ribbed, two separate fabrics which are connected to each all the knits are connected to each other, all the purls are connected to each other, but are separate aside from that. So when I do this in my live workshops, I pause the workshop in 3 different places. The cast on to make sure the cast on worked. The first row, so after we've done the first row, I pause and I walk around and I check everyone's work because I'm looking for some very specific issues that might occur. Because I can't really do that here, I will talk about what might happen, and you can, if you see it, you can address it. And then I have us stop on the third row, and I check and make sure your first row with color changing worked out. So again, that's not something that I can walk around and look at, but I can give you work up here to compare yours to. So we're just going to keep doing A-B pairs here. We're just going to be knitting one in A with both yarns in back, and then purling one in B with both yarns in front. These are A-B pairs, and they continue all the way across the piece. When you get to the end of the row, you're going to remove the slip knot. Don't work the slip knot. We still want 13 pairs when we're done with this row. Okay, so we hit the end of that, and all that's left now is the slip knot. We just remove the needle and untie it. The cast on is perfectly stable at this point. There's no reason to worry about about removing the slip knot. So when you're done with that row, this is what you should have. And there's not a lot to show right now because not that much has come down into the work, but as you can see, we have a row of stitches all in one color, in the light color on this layer. And if you flip it over, you have another row of stitches all in the dark color. They shouldn't interfere with each other. You shouldn't end up with any significant amount of the light color on this side or any significant amount of the dark color on this side. There are some exceptions to that. Depending on your tension, you might see little bumps in between right here. I don't, because my tension is good, but there's actually on this side, you can kind of see them. These are normal. These are not errors. These are simply the purl bumps showing up in between the knits on one layer, showing the purls from the other layer showing in between. That's not actually a problem. The problems that you might look for are bars, which are more likely to show up on the back of your work, meaning that you might not see them on this layer, but when you turn it over to do the next row, sorry for the tangly there, you might see bars. Bars are little bits of the other color which cover over the knits. And bars happen when you don't bring both yarns together to the front or to the back. They also can happen if there are they can happen in certain continental moves. So if that's happening for you, let me know and we can address it. Bars are actually easily fixed because all a bar is the bar that runs between any knit stitch and any other knit stitch. But instead of going on this layer from knit stitch to knit stitch, it ends up on the other layer wrapping around the purl, which on this layer looks like a knit and therefore is obscured by that wrapped around bar. All you really need to do to fix that is get up to that point and then just pull the stitch under the bar and toss the bar to the other side. The other thing that can happen is a twist, and that happens when you twist your yarns around each other and take the new stitch from beyond that twist. This is an extreme example. Most people won't end up with this much twist, but if you take a new stitch from beyond that twist, you're going to end up with all of that twist jammed down into the space between the previous stitch and the next one, which will give you sort of a blip of the other color between two knits or between, in between two knits on one layer or the other. There's no really easy way to fix that. I would just say if it were to happen in an actual piece that you're going to be using or gifting, I might go back and fix it. For this piece, if it happens, it is not going to stop you from going further. So don't worry about it. It's okay for you to have a little historical record of your learning process in a little swatch like this. So it's okay if you if you have a few mistakes, as long as you can go forward with them. All right, so moving on, at this point, we have another row to do, which is very similar to the last row. Indeed, you're going to continue knitting your knits and purling your purls, but because you have flipped it over, now you are going to be doing BA pairs rather than AB pairs. The other thing that's different here is that there is going to be a linked pair at the beginning of the row. There was no linked pair at the beginning of the first row. If you look at the chart, note that the first row in the chart, row 1, is just all the same type of square, no other symbols. On row 2, very similar, but with a little plus sign as the very first item in the chart. As you can see in the key, it says this is a linked pair. This is something that happens in double knitting and not in single layer knitting, because it operates on the fact that there is actually a pair of stitches for each of these squares. A linked pair simply links the two layers together. In general, we only do this at the edges. There are some specialized reasons why we might do it elsewhere, but we'll almost never do it anywhere else inside the work. So you're going to do it as the first stitch or the first pair in every row. It happens in between the knit and the purl. So we're going to start off with a knit just as normal. So we're going to do a knit in color B. We're going to bring both yarns to the front. Note that right now the two yarns are separate. If I just went ahead and purled this, the separation would mean that I would end up with a hole in my work. And you saw the effect of that in the Corvus scarf. I believe the Corvus scarf's hole is probably 2 of them in a row. I don't know how that happened, but it's a good educational tool. Still, you should try to avoid it here. And what I'm going to recommend you do is stick your needle into the next stitch as if to purl. But before you do the purl, you simply twist the 2 yarns around each other. This should look a little similar to the mistake I just demoed, because that is actually what we're trying to do on purpose here. We're going to make a twist between the knit and the purl. The direction of this twist doesn't really matter. You will probably notice, though, that if you twist it in one direction, it will end up more twisty. And if you twist it in the other direction, it will be less twisty. I give it a counterclockwise twist. A counterclockwise twist, for me, in my knitting style, gives me the smallest amount of functional twist. So you really just need the smallest amount of functional twist that will allow the two edges to get linked together. So I've stuck my needle into the next stitch purlwise. I've twisted the two yarns around each other, and I'm about to finish the purl, taking it from beyond the twist. When I finish that purl, I can then pull my my yarn out a little bit so that you can see how the two yarns interact. So the color B comes off of the knit that I just made, passes underneath a little bit of the purl stitch just below the purl, and then moves on. If that worked, great. You can keep going with the row. If it didn't work, you might want to try it again. I'm just going to demo it one more time, but do keep in mind that you'll have an opportunity to try this at the beginning of every row. So if one doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. You can keep going with your double knitting and try again on the next one. So again, knit one, yarns to the front. Note that they are currently separate. Put your needle into the next stitch purlwise. Twist the two yarns around each other and finish the purl with color A. They're now linked together, and we're going to continue with BA pairs. This works in the same way that the previous row worked. So yarns to the back, knit one in B, yarns to the front, purl one in A. So if you ran into twists, I'm going to talk about a little bit of theory here, which I will refer to again throughout this class, called the ribbon analogy. So the ribbon analogy is my way of thinking about how these two yarns interact with each other and interact with the needle. So if you hold two yarns together, they're going to fall together in something that looks like a ribbon. This happens whenever you have two yarns which you hold together. The most natural way for them to fall together is in this sort of flat ribbon shape. So the ribbon, as you notice, has an edge of one color and an edge of the other color. If you take this ribbon and you move it to the other side of the work, note that the ribbon itself doesn't change. All that changes is how it relates to the needle. The front edge of the ribbon, you may also see this as the bottom edge, depending on the way you're holding it and the way you're thinking about your ends. But I think of this as the front edge, and I think of this as the back one. So the front edge of the ribbon is going to create the front layer of your work. The back edge of the ribbon is going to create the back layer of your work. So in this orientation, with B in front and A in back, you end up with BA pairs. At the back, the ribbon's front edge is facing the needle and the back edge is out of the way. So we knit with the front edge. At the front, the back edge is facing the needle and the front edge is out of the way. So we purl with the back edge. And as long as you keep the ribbon in that orientation and you don't twist it, you will end up with two separate layers of fabric, and you won't end up with that little blip of color that, that you might see if you did a twist. The twist could happen between your knit and your purl, or your purl and your knit. And it will show up slightly differently depending on which of those you do, as well as whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise. The other thing that I mentioned, the bar, as I mentioned, that happens when you don't bring both yarns forward or both yarns back. So if I were to bring one yarn to the front here and leave this one at the back, I could still do a purl. And when I brought it back together, I would still be able to do a knit, But what I can't immediately see here is that there is a bar across my work. And that bar, I mean, it is actually visible here because it's missing here. And so you often see a little vertical line of color. And here you see that the yarn is obscuring that knit. As I mentioned on the way back, you don't actually need any yarn for this. So I can just turn it over, slip up to it, and then take that bar and toss it over to the other side of the work. And we're back in business. So generally very easy to fix. If you run into a diagonal bar, a bar that does not go straight across, it's a bar combined with a twist. So if you do a bar and a twist at the same time, you're going to end up with a bar that can't be fixed, or it can be fixed, but you then end up with a twist that's visible. So those are just a couple of things to think about if you're even running into those problems. If you're not running into those problems, don't worry about those things. You don't need to think about it. But if you are, those are ways to deal with it and ways to fix it if needed. So I'm just going to finish out this row. This is the last row in which there is no color work, at least until the end of the swatch. So when we're done with this row, we're going to bring in the chart again. We're going to talk about how to follow that. And then move on with row 3. Oops. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, as I mentioned, is row 3. Row 3 is the beginning of the color work, and I'm going to bring the chart in so that we can talk about that. So first things first, I'd like to take a little straw poll here. You don't have to answer, but if you do want to answer in the chat. I want to know if there's anyone here who really isn't comfortable following charts in general. It doesn't have to be double knit charts, just you know, any kind of chart. If you generally prefer the written instructions and you don't feel comfortable with charts in general, let me know in the chat, because I do, at least for this pattern, have some verbal notation down here. But if you don't need it, I don't need to go over it. But if there is anyone here who needs it, not only can I talk about this, I can also talk about how it interacts with this and potentially get you to the point where you are more comfortable with charts, which is important because by and large, the vast majority of my patterns don't come with verbal notation. I do have one pattern that's coming out with verbal notation soon because it was requested by Schepia from the Netherlands, who's putting out the pattern. It is actually quite interesting to do, to have to write out a pattern, and I might do it more in the future for certain specific patterns. I haven't seen any wailing or gnashing of teeth in the chat, so I'm going to assume that we are largely comfortable with charts. Of course, reading a double knit chart is slightly different from reading a single layer chart, but I can certainly take you through that. So the cardinal difference between this chart and any other chart that looks very similar to it in single layer knitting is that in double knitting, each square in the chart denotes a pair of stitches, not just a single stitch. As you can see, since we cast on 13 pairs and there are 13 columns, that follows that, of course, each column is a column of pairs, and so each square is a pair. This is borne out, of course, by the key, which tells you that this color is worked either as an AB pair or a BA pair. This color is worked either as a BA pair or an AB pair, which leaves a lot of room for error unless you understand what I mean by layer 1 and layer 2. So a layer 1 row is a row in which layer 1 is facing you. Layer 1 is the layer that looks like the chart. In other words, the background is light, the motif is dark. A layer 2 row is a row which has reversed color and reversed orientation, meaning that the background is dark and the motif is light. You have on page 3 of your handout a view of the finished little flower sample from both layer 1 and layer 2. Now, a layer 1 row does not only work layer 1, it is only working from the point of view of layer 1. So from the point of view of layer 1, this is an AB pair. The same exact pair that you made as an AB pair, if flipped over and looked at from layer 2, is a BA pair, which is why a layer 2 is followed in the opposite colors. I can just illustrate that quickly. All of these are AB pairs as viewed from layer 1. If you flip it over, all of these are BA pairs. It's just two different ways of viewing the same exact pair. And therefore, two different ways of knitting the same exact pair. So in row 3, what we're going to do is 3 AB pairs, then 7 BA pairs, then 3 AB pairs for a total of 13. And of course, the easiest way to do that is just to do it. So I'm going to start off the same way that I started off the last couple of rows. I'm going to knit one. And I'm going to do the same thing I did in the previous row, which is a linked pair, yarns to the front. Put your needle into the next stitch purlwise, twist the 2 yarns around each other, and finish the purl. By the way, if this particular method of doing the linked pair is giving you trouble, Suzanne Bryan on YouTube, that's Bryan, has another method that gives you the exact same edge, but doesn't require that you do that twist. It isn't that the twist doesn't happen, it's just that it's executed differently. And you may find that that is a more comfortable way of doing it for you. For me, I'd rather just do it in line with my knitting. So knit one, twist, and then purl one, and then we're going to do 2 more pairs in AB. So this gives us a total of 3 pairs in AB before the first color change. Sorry. One moment. Okay. So we've done 3 pairs in AB. They're the same as what you had in the row below. And now we're going to switch to BA pairs, and we're going to do 7 of them. Now, we're going to continue knitting into our knits and purling into our purls. You're just going to change what color you're knitting with and what color you're purling with. So this is a knit, and you're going to continue knitting into it, but you're going to knit it with B. And when you bring both yarns forward, you're then going to purl in A. So I should have mentioned before I started this row, one of the cardinal rules of double knitting. It's sort of something that goes along with the reading of the chart. So one of these cardinal rules is that every pair consists of, every stitch is part of a pair, and every pair consists of one of each color and one of each stitch. So it has a stitch order and a color order. The stitch order is the order in which the stitches go on the needle, knit, purl, or the color order is the order in which the colors go on the needle, A, B, for example. You're never going to have a purl knit pair in this style of double knitting. So your stitch order is not going to change. All that changes is your color order. So you're going to end up with either A-B pairs or BA pairs. You should never have a pair that is both the same color, both A or both B. Every pair, when you knit in one color, you follow it up with a purl of the other color. So we've done a BA pair here, and we're going to continue in BA pairs. When you do that BA pair, by the way, right next to the AB pair that preceded it, you'll notice that, I'm just going to do that pair there. Okay, you'll notice that there are two of one color next to each other. Now, I told you you should never have a pair that is both the same color, but this is not a pair. This is the end of one pair and the beginning of the next. It's easy to tell that because the first of that group of two of the same color is a purl. The second is a knit. Since there are no purl knit pairs, you know that this is the end of a pair adjacent to the beginning of the next. So you're going to continue on with those BA pairs until you have 7 of them. You can also check that you have 3 pairs left on your needle. Excuse me. So I've got my 3 AB pairs, then 2, 4, 6, 7 BA pairs, and then I'm going to switch back to AB again for the rest of the row. Now, when I switch to AB, you'll notice that I end up with 2 A's in a row. From BA to AB, BAAB means 2 A's in a row. Just like ABBA means 2 B's in a row. This is not something you have to force to happen. It will automatically happen when you switch from an AB pair to a BA pair or vice versa. You can follow the logic of it if you want. If you don't remember what to do next for your color change, you simply look at the previous pair and you knit the same color that you just purled with. Once you've done that, you know that every pair must be one of each color, and therefore you must purl with the color that is opposite from what you just knit with. And then you have made your color change, and you can continue on with that color order for the rest of the row or until you run into another color change. So when we get to the end of this row, I'm going to bring the chart back in and talk about one more little bit of this this row, and then I'll talk about the next row, which is a layer 2 row. So in row 3, we've done 3 AB pairs, 7 BA pairs, 3 AB pairs. There are 2 color changes in this row. A color change in double knitting is more accurately termed a color order change. So we change color orders from AB to BA here. So this line right here is a color change. We change color orders from BA to AB here, And so this line is also a color change. So just two color changes. It has nothing to do with what's in the row below. It has to do with what came before and what comes after within the row. It's that change right there that links the fabric together. The transition from row to row doesn't make any real difference as far as linking the fabric together. It's only color changes that happen within the row that link the fabric together. Of course, with a motif like this, you're not really going to notice the fact that this line is hollow because it's just a single line. Okay, so on the way back, we're going to do BA pairs in this color. As you can see, we are on a layer 2 row. This color is followed as a BA pair. It's followed as a BA pair on layer 2 so that when you turn it over, it can be read as AB pairs. You can end up with A here where it's supposed to be. So row 4, we're going to do BA pairs until we have 7 of them. Don't let the color change in the row below throw you off. It's very easy for people to get through these first 3 pairs, see that something new happened in the previous row, and make a change there. Don't do that. Just keep going with your BA pairs until you have 7 of them. Then an AB pair, and then immediately back to BA pairs for the rest of the row. So this row, much like the last row, also has only 2 color changes. They are very close to each other, but there are only 2 of them. So let's get going on that. So we're going to start off with a linked pair as usual. So knit 1 in B, yarns to the front, put your needle into the next as if to purl, twist the 2 yarns together, and finish the purl in A. Then BA pairs until you have 7 of them, counting the linked pair, of course. So I've got my 7 BA pairs here. Note that I didn't do anything different at this point. What is going on in the row below is important, but not a guide for you to make a change here. You continue on with BA pairs. The first 3 match what's in the row below, the next 4 don't, but you still continue with BA pairs, and then you're going to work an AB pair, 1 AB pair. So this is a color change from BA to AB. And then we're going to do another one immediately after that, from AB back to BA again. And so when you do that, you'll end up with these 2 groups of color right next to each other. But if you separate it out, you can see that we have BA pairs on either side of a single AB pair. And then you're just going to continue with BA pairs until you hit the end of this row. Oops. All right, having done row 4, you can now begin to see row 3 in the work itself. You can begin to see the ground that the flower is growing out of on both layers. Just like in any other color work, motif-based color work, you don't get to see the work that you've just done on the needle, but when you've done a second row on top, that first row drops down into the work and you can begin to actually see the fruits of your labors with your color work. So that first row with the color work, row 3, was a layer 1 row. Second row was a layer 2 row. And we're going to alternate those, of course, layer 1, then layer 2, then layer 1, then layer 2. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why working double knitting in the round is easier, because you never actually have to look at layer 2. You're only ever following layer 1 rules in your key, which is very nice. But I find that it is a good idea to teach people the flat version so that you are prepared to do either flat or in the round. And then you just have to take away some rules rather than adding new ones to do a circular piece. Circular pieces, of course, also don't have edges, so you never have to deal with a linked pair. All right, so you should have technically all of the stuff you need in order to go on with the next several rows. You can follow the chart and the key, but I do want to talk about some extra stuff in this next row. And in this row, I'm going to talk about yarn management, and I'm also going to demo the Selvedge. Now, the Selvedge is something that alternates with the linked pair. You alternate linked pairs and slipped pairs. So the slipped pair happens at the end of the row. The linked pair happens at the beginning of the row. Combined, you end up with a Selvedge. So when I get to the end of this next row, I will show the slipped pair, then I will turn and show the linked pair on the way back, which does change subtly from the way that we're doing it now. So yarn management, though, is the first order of this row. And what I'm talking about when I mention yarn, when I mention yarn management, is the tendency of your yarn to start looking like this. You may already have noticed that it is starting to twist up, and I'm going to show you where that twist comes from and how to manage it, how to avoid it, and also how to fix it on the fly. You can, of course, always just let your work dangle out or play leapfrog with your yarn balls, whatever you like, in order to undo this twist. But I'm also going to show you how to deal with it on the fly so you don't have to do that. After I've done this row and shown the Selvedge, we'll be at an ideal place for us to take a short break, and then at the end of the break we'll have another half of the workshop or so, and there'll be plenty of time for Q&A and other stuff. As I have more rows to work on, I can demo other things, and then at about a quarter to the end or 10 minutes to the end, thereabouts, I will show the bind off, regardless of where I happen to be in the swatch. So yarn management and the issue of twist. So in order to understand the twist, you have to know first where it comes from. So the first place that the twist is likely to come from is the linked pair itself. So I'm going to start off this row with a linked pair, as I always do. But I'm going to mention that if every time you do a linked pair, you do a counterclockwise twist, as you should be consistent. Clockwise or counterclockwise doesn't matter. Just be consistent about it. But if every time you do it, you go in one particular direction, I'm choosing counterclockwise because it's the way I do my twist, you will notice that your yarn ends will continue to get twistier and twistier because there is a twist that you have anchored into each edge. That's not something you can avoid. Even with the Suzanne Bryan method, there is still a twist that happens, and it will still cause a twist in your ends. So this is something that is a necessary evil of this particular technique. You have to deal with the twist that is added at the edges. Which is why when I talk about yarn management, I am not only talking about how to avoid the twist, but how to manage it, because you are going to end up with some, even if you don't want it. The second place where it shows up, where the twist shows up, is in mistakes. And when I say mistakes, I'm talking about one very specific type of mistake, which is the twist, where you twist your yarns around each other and take the new color from beyond that twist. So here I am taking a knit from beyond the twist, and I'll twist it in the opposite direction just to make it even more obvious. There we go. So you can see all that twist down there. And I'm taking the new yarn from beyond that twist, which means that that twist gets pushed down into the space between the previous stitch and the one I'm just about to make. If I do that, you'll notice that what happens to the bar that runs between my knit, my previous knit, and my next knit is that it's slightly obscured by a little twist, a little bit of the other color. That may show up more on one layer than the other. So it showed up a little bit on this layer. Let's take a look at the other layer. So yeah, it's not significantly showing up on this layer. It will usually show up on one layer, but not the other. In this case, it looks like it's the front layer. So that twist that I just put in there, I'm going to leave that in there just for illustrative purposes, but truly the best way to avoid adding twist in the middle of your work is not to twist the ribbon. Now, the ribbon analogy is, as I mentioned, just an analogy. It doesn't mean that you have to hold your two yarns together like this. I just want to make sure that you understand that as you move the yarns around to knit and to purl, they should stay in the same relationship to each other. If in the process of moving them back and forth, they twist around each other and you end up with twist, which you take a stitch from beyond, you are going to end up anchoring the twist into the work, which creates a color artifact, and adding twist to your ends, which you then have to manage later. So the third and most common place for the twist to show up is in color changes. So I'm working up to the first color change here. So in this color change, I am going to have to twist my ribbon. So right now, up until now, my ribbon has been configured so that the front edge of the ribbon is color A because it is generating the front layer of the work with AB pairs. And the back edge of the ribbon is B. So as I've been moving it back and forth, the ribbon has not twisted. When you do a color change, the ribbon must twist. So note that the ribbon is now in the opposite orientation. B is now at the front and A is now at the back. So let me just go back one because I want to illustrate one other thing there. The twist of that ribbon going from AB to BA is all about taking the yarn that was being used at the back and bringing it to the front. And the yarn that was on the front has nowhere else to go at that point but to the back. But the direction in which that twist happens is arbitrary, or you can choose it without any real consequence to the work. You can twist like this to bring the yarn that was at the back to the front, or like this. Either one works. So this is a clockwise twist. This is a counterclockwise twist. The directions that I'm mentioning there are somewhat arbitrary, but the way I figured it out is just if you hold them straight up, looking at it, in this case, looking at the camera, the way you twist them is either clockwise or counterclockwise. The way you think about it is entirely up to you, but keep in mind there are two different options. So I'm going to show both of them. If I take my new color, my knit color, from over the top like this, which gives me a clockwise twist for this particular color change. And then for the next color change, I take my new color from underneath like this, which is a counterclockwise twist. Note that we are back to AB color order on this ribbon, and we have had a net twist of 0 because the first color change went like this, the second one went like this, which undoes the twist in the second color change. So that's handy if you can keep the presence of mind to alternate twist directions with every color change. In reality, I can't even do that most of the time, and I don't expect you to. So I have done entire patterns that way, but it's a lot to worry about, and it's not necessary. In reality, what you really are probably going to be doing is waiting until the twist gets annoying enough, and then look at the direction of the twist and make your next bunch of color changes in the opposite direction as you go, and that will undo little bits of twist, a little bit of twist, a little bit of twist each time. It may not all happen in the same row, but eventually you will get to a point where there is no more twist. So let's see if I have any twist. I might or I might not. I have had times when there has been plenty, and I have had times when there is almost none. And in this case, there's almost none. This is something that I do by default now. I don't even really think about it. So I just alternate I don't completely alternate them, but I just sort of feel for the way the twist is going, and I undo it as I go by default. So though I do have a little bit of a very small amount of twist here, which indicates that I ought to do a clockwise twist for this next color change. And since at this point all the twist is gone, it doesn't really matter what direction I go with my next one. So all right, so now we're at the end of this row, and as I mentioned, I was going to show you the Selvedge. So I alluded to what we're really going to be doing here, which is linking the first pair and slipping the last pair. Now, if you're familiar with selvedges in general, usually what you're doing is you're slipping the first pair in each row. But you can also slip the last pair in each row and still get a selvedge. The important thing is that you're consistent about it. In this case, because we have to link the first stitch or the first pair, we cannot also slip that pair and still be able to link it together. And so I have the slipped pair at the end of the row. Now, a slipped pair in double knitting is just a matter of making sure the yarns hide between the layers, which means that it has to go behind the knit and in front of the purl. So all that really happens is you move the yarn as if you were working it, but rather than working each stitch, you just slip it. So yarns to the back, slip one, yarns to the front, slip the other one. And that's a slipped pair. Note that if I turn it over, I also cannot see the yarns. They are in between the layers. Now, when I turn it and start the next row, I do have to do a linked pair, but because I did a slipped pair in the previous row, the linked pair changes subtly. And the way it changes is that you do a knit through the back of the loop for the first stitch. That's the only change. Knit through the back of the loop in color B, then yarns to the front, put your needle into the next stitch purlwise, twist and purl. And if we stretch this out, you can see that the knit color is coming off of the knit, going underneath a bit of the purl color just below the purl. Same exact thing that happened in the previous linked pair, but much, much looser now because of this slipped pair below it. So the link is still happening, but it's held more loosely. I'm just going to do one more pair right after it to anchor it in place and show you one other thing about it. So that selvage, I'm going to show you just one of these pieces here. The most you can see that the selvage gets you stitches that are twice as tall along the edge as the rest of the work. That's normal selvage behavior. But the other thing that it does is you'll notice perhaps that the non-selvage version of this edge may show you a little blip of the other color in between your first stitch and your second on any given row. That may show up on one side more than the other, for the same reason that twisting your yarns together somewhere in the middle of your work may show differently on the front or on the back. So there are going to be probably cases where that link shows up more prominently in non-selvage rows. Selvedge rows have a much more invisible link. The link ends up much more easily hidden, partially because it's more loosely held, and partially because the act of slipping that pair sort of sucks the link one pair further inside the work, or at least one stitch further. So we are now at the halfway point of this workshop, and this is right where I wanted to be. I'm just going to quickly finish up this row so that I am not leaving it with an incomplete row. But then I think we should take a short break, let you stretch and grab a drink, whatever you need to do for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we will continue. So if you come up with questions while we are on break, you can either hold on to them until we get back and I've turned the recording back on, or you can stick them in the chat and I can answer them when I get back, one way or the other. I want to make sure that anyone watching this later will also benefit from any questions that are asked. So I want to make sure it gets recorded. So I am going to continue my selvages here. So I'm going to end this row with a slipped pair as well. So again, yarns to the back, slip one, yarns to the front, slip the other one. Both slips are purlwise. This is not, by the way, notated in the chart, but for the benefit of folks who want to know what that would look like in a chart, I'll show you from yesterday's Intarsha workshop. These little upside down triangles are the slipped pair. You may have seen slipped stitches notated with a little V shape or a V with a little cross through it for either slipping with yarns in front or slipping with yarns in back. Since this is slipping with yarns in front and back for a pair, I just moved that little bar up to the top and made a triangle. So the upside down triangle, as you find it in my various patterns, is the slipped pair. Okay, so it is now 2 past halfway, and we are going to pause for about 10 minutes. I'm going to pause the recording. You can go do whatever you need to do. You can keep working if you like. And in about 10 minutes, I will be back. I'll check for faces and boxes, and then we'll move on with the rest of the workshop. So I'm just going to pause the recording here. Okay, so we're back again, and I'm going to switch back to the hand camera again. So this workshop, as you've probably already noticed to some degree, is technique agnostic. I don't really care how you do your how you hold your yarn, etc. I can give you pointers, but you can do double knitting in English style, continental style, combination style, Norwegian style, whatever you like, whatever works for you. You do not need to learn a different knitting style in order to do double knitting. My knitting style is unusual, doesn't have a name that I'm aware of, but it is a sort of combination, I suppose, of continental and English in that it is left-handed, but with a wrap. So I noticed a question from Leslie about, is anyone working with the yarn in each hand? If so, how confusing is it? I have run into a lot of people who do that. As a matter of fact, Lucy Neatby, who's considered one of the more prolific double knitters, I believe works with both yarns in both hands. Sorry, with one yarn in each hand. At least I have seen her teach that way. I don't know whether she works that way all the time. That is actually a really good way to keep the yarns from ever twisting around each other, because if they're pointing in opposite directions, then it's very hard to do this by accident. On the other hand, the way that the other things to think about in that method are that moving the yarn from back to front and from front to back, if you are holding both yarns together, is a single motion. Whereas if you're holding them in 2 separate hands, it's 2 motions, and you have to remember to do both of them. The other thing to keep in mind is that the ribbon, so to speak, obviously cannot operate in an actual ribbon shape. But you can have one yarn over your finger, or one yarn over your right hand in some way, one yarn over your left, and keep them in that orientation as long as you are continuing in a particular color order. When you want to twist the ribbon, so to speak, oftentimes what you're going to need to do is switch which one is in which hand. And that will allow you to continue with the same motions without any real adjustment. So those are the things that I have observed from people who do that style. It's absolutely a legitimate style to do this. It simplifies one thing at the very least, but it does add some complexities you have to keep in mind. So I've also got a question from Bianca to review the Selvedge. Of course, not a problem. I have to do the Selvedge at the beginning and end of each row anyway, so I'm happy to continue talking about it and showing it. Since I'm at the beginning of this row, I will show the linked pair, but just because it's easy enough to go back one pair here, I'll just show the whole thing. So the Selvedge, as I mentioned, is a combination of two techniques. They both work on the same pair, literally the same pair, not just the same column of pairs, because the first technique is a slipped pair, and the whole point of it is that you're bypassing that pair. But in order to do that, you have to work both stitches, or at least work past them by slipping them. Then you work them again, actually work them in the next row by linking them together. So yarns to the back, slip one, purlwise, yarns to the front, slip the other one purlwise. All you're doing is you're moving your yarn as if you were working it, yarn to the back to knit, yarn to the front to purl, but slipping both stitches. And in doing so, you are allowing the two ends to pass between the layers without actually working the stitches. Then on the way back, in order to keep this first column from twisting, you want to work through the back of the loop. So knit through the back of the loop for the first stitch. And then yarns to the front. And the second move is exactly the same as it was prior to the Selvedge. You're still going to, you note that they are separate, twist them around each other, and finish the purl from beyond that twist, which causes the link to happen. You can see that little crossover there between the knit color and the purl color just below the purl. That's the link in the linked pair. Oops. So as I work through some more of this, this pattern, I will answer questions as they pop up, but I can also talk about a few other things that are often asked, even if they haven't been asked here. One of them is about fiber content, yarn choice, also gauge and thickness of yarn. I can talk about those. So starting off with fiber content, you can of course do double knitting in fiber of any fiber content, yarn of any fiber content, but you will get the best behaved fabric in animal fibers or animal fiber blends or acrylics, because acrylics tend to be created to mimic the characteristics of animal fiber without actually having any animal fiber in them. So they have a similar sort of springiness, although not exactly. Cottons and linens and other plant-derived fibers tend to not have as much memory to them, which means that a fabric that's this stretchy will just stretch out and remain stretched in a cotton, most cottons. I have found one cotton ever that is spun in such a way that it mimics the stretch of a wool, but it's not, even then, it's not really perfect. For the most part, cottons are not terribly cooperative with this type of knitting. That said, for very specific uses like washcloths or whatever, you might still want to do that. By and large, though, what you're going to want to use is animal fibers because they are going to have the memory you need for the work to snap back into place after you stretch it out. As far as gauge and well, let's first go to thickness of yarn. Keep in mind that this is, as you can see, twice as thick as the same fabric made in the same yarn and the same needles with only one layer. This is fairly obvious, but keep it in mind as you're deciding what you're going to work with, because when I work in, this is a DK, if I work in a DK, I'm getting something that is sort of on par with a maybe an Aran weight or a little heavier than that. If I work in worsted, I'm going to get something that's on par with like a bulky weight fabric. But the same is true if you go in the other direction. If you work in a sport weight, you're going to end up with fabric that is similar to a worsted weight in single layer knitting. And if you work in fingering weight, you're going to end up with fabric that's similar to DK weight in single layer knitting. So those are, of course, rough estimates in terms of thickness, but I find that working in a fingering or a sport gives me not only better detail and more detail and better stitch definition, but also in general a more wearable fabric, a fabric that is less thick. That said, you probably noticed that several of the pieces that I showed were in a worsted or a DK weight, but all of the pieces that I showed are things that are not fitted. They are, either cowls that tend to be loose, or scarves that are not typically worn tight around your neck. They're just sort of loosely draped. And so in cases like that, you can get away with thicker yarns. And of course, if you are, and when I say thicker, I don't mean ever going to something like a bulky or chunky weight. While you can do that, and I have done a little bit of it, even in the Parallax collection, there is one seat cushion made out of chunky weight yarn. A seat cushion is about as much double knitting as I wanted to do in chunky weight. So in general, the highest I go is worsted, and by default, I try to go no higher than DK. In most of my designs, I try to stick to sport and fingering. In terms of gauge and tension, as compared to your standard single layer fabric, the reason that I ask you to use yarn that you are familiar with, or yarn that you have and needles that you would normally use with that yarn, is that I want you to see how double knitting changes your gauge. If it does at all, it may not. But for most people, they will find that double knitting changes their gauge somewhat to make it make the stitches a bit larger. In order to get fabric that is similar to what you would normally get on the same needles and the same yarn in single layer knitting, you may need to go down a needle size or two. I asked you to start by using the same needles so that you can get a good idea of how double knitting changes your gauge, if it does at all, and it may not. In fact, for me, my gauge is very similar for double knitting versus single layer knitting. It's not perfect, but it's very similar. I certainly don't feel the need to go down a needle size in order to achieve similar fabric. I did once have a sample knitter, though, who I called for US 6 needles in that particular project that I was asking her to work on. And in order to match the gauge that I called for, she had to go down to US 3s. And then midway through the piece, or it was a hat, so around the crown, she ended up with a bunch of life stuff that got in the way and had to send it back to me to finish. I took it off the 3s that she was using, put it back on 6s, matched her gauge, and finished it. So it was a good example of how our personal ways of knitting inform the gauge that we end up with. So I had a couple people talk about tension and difficulties with tension. This is a little bit beyond the scope of what I can teach because everybody's knitting style is a little different. And while this is something that I may be able to help with more easily in person, in a virtual space where I can't stand over your shoulder and watch you knit and say, oh, maybe try this, maybe try that. I can just give you more general guidelines in terms of tension. The thing that most people notice most regularly in double knitting is that your tension in knits and your tension in purls tend to be a little different, which means that your gauge in knits and your gauge in purl tend to be a little different. Some people notice that their fabric, rather than appearing all in uniform stitches, may have a bit of what we call rowing out, which has which means that you have a row that is a bit larger and a row that is a bit narrower, and a row that is a bit larger and a row that's a bit narrower, which gives you this sort of horizontal ripple effect. The same thing that happens in single layer knitting potentially can happen in double knitting, because in flat double knitting, your rows do alternate which row is made of knits and which row is made of purls. So in any given layer, one row of stitches is all made of knits, the next is all made of purls, just like in single layer knitting. And if you flip it over, the same is true. So if that's something that you are prone to, unfortunately, there's not an easy way to fix it. One of the ways that it is often fixed in single layer knitting is by working with two different needles of two different sizes. Unfortunately here, because you are working knits and purls within the same row, that's not a viable solution. So what you really need to do is look at the two techniques that you're using. Look at your knit technique, look at your purl technique, and figure out whether one of them can be tightened or one of them can be loosened as you go. Because that's what the difference is. The difference is that you have a difference between your knit and your purl techniques, and it is creating a difference in size of stitch. The way that happens is that one of them is getting pulled tight and the other one is staying loose. More often than not, it's the purl that's staying loose. but it may be the other way around. So you need to figure out which of those stitches is the looser one. And what I recommend, honestly, is if you find that your pearls are the looser of the two, whenever you're done with your pearl, give it a little tug. I know it's an extra move, but whatever you're doing to make your pearl, just give it a little tug before you move on to the next stitch. If you find that that's not good enough, then the other thing that you can do is give it a harder tug. And the reason that I say that is when you need to snug up your edge pair, for example. Let me go back just to illustrate this really well. And this, of course, applies to anything, not just the edge pairs, but the edge pairs are a place where it happens a lot. So you notice that as you do that edge pair, after you've just done it, it stretches. It moves pretty readily. If you wanted to make this nice and tight, pulling it at this point isn't going to help you, because as soon as you start working, you've already tugged it out again. But if you do this, one more pair, let's just stretch this out for effect anyway. One more pair. So this is the second pair into the row. If I tug on this, note that it snugs this one and it stays snug. If I tug on this one, it snugs the other one and it stays snug as I move forward. So the edge is now snug and it's not going to move when I work on this next pair. The same general idea is true if you are finding that you're that you need to adjust your tension on either your knits or your pearls. If you tug on the one stitch, that amount of tugging is not going to help all that much. But if you tug harder, it's going to snug the previous one. So tug or tug harder. Harder doesn't do anything to this stitch. It snugs the previous one. And it snugs it in a way that it will stay snug. So that's my recommendation for tension issues. It is highly dependent on your knitting style, though. I hope that that you can analyze well enough what you are doing that that bit of advice will help. The other thing to keep in mind is if you are working double knitting in the round, the effect of knits and pearls is magnified. The effect of the difference between your knit and purl gauges is magnified, because in the flat, every other row, just like in single layer knitting, switches which is your knit and which is your purl, which layers knits and which layers pearls. But in the round, layer one is all made out of knits and layer two is all made out of pearls, regardless of what color each is. The result of a radically different or even subtly different purl versus knit gauge means that the inner layer of our circular piece can very easily become larger than the outer layer. And the way we deal with that is simply to add more color work, because at the color changes, your layers anchor together. And so if you have more color work, if you choose a pattern that has more intricate color, the tendency of that inner layer to balloon out or balloon in to the inside of the work will be minimized, because it won't have the freedom to move, because it will be anchored more frequently. The other thing you can do in absolute worst case scenario is simply choose which layer you think you're most likely to work, most likely to wear on the outside more frequently, and work it inside out. And then just turn it inside out. And then the larger layer will be on the outside rather than the inside, and you'll be all good. Of course, these are very specialized solutions for specialized things. If you have a different tension issue that wasn't addressed by all the stuff I just went through, please let us know. Stick it in the chat and let me see if there's something else I can do for you. My best advice really is just practice, practice, practice. And the more you do it, the cleaner it gets. The only issue is if you dislike the fabric so much because it isn't coming out well that you can't bring yourself to practice, practice, practice. We have to figure out what we can do to get you to a point where it is still something that you enjoy looking at after you've done it. I see the chat from Becca, who was one of the people who mentioned tension issues, and she's noted that that changing her knitting style helped a lot with the tension. And if you are able to do that, in this case, what she was doing before was working with one in each hand, and now she's working with both in the same hand, whether English or continental, I don't know, but both in the same hand rather than one in each seems to have evened out her tension. So that's another thing that you can do. If you have the luxury of knowing more than one knitting style and being capable of switching between them, try a different knitting style and see if it helps your tension. That's an excellent an excellent piece of advice from June Hemmons Hyatt. Says, always know more than one knitting style, because if you get fatigued in one, you can keep knitting in another. A piece of advice I should probably take, but I also haven't had fatigue issues with mine yet. So while I'm going through this, I have time and I'm not seeing any other questions. I want to give one other piece of useful info that you may find helpful. And that is a troubleshooting tip, a way of fixing a mistake. Now, it's a way of fixing a specific mistake. which means that if you run into a different kind of mistake, it may not actually help you. But it is one of those things that as you are getting used to following double knitting color work in a chart, one of the things that frequently happens is that even if you do all of your pairs correctly, you may still end up doing a pair in the wrong place, meaning an AB pair where there should have been a BA pair, or a BA pair where there should have been an AB pair. So your pairs are all formed correctly, but they are formed correctly in the wrong place, for example. So an AB pair and a BA pair both use the same amount of yarn. So it should be possible to switch an AB pair to a BA pair without too much trouble. And indeed, I can show you how that works. However, if you do an AA pair or a BB pair, that can't be so easily fixed. You will need to, at that point, undo the work up until that point and then redo it with fixing the issue that happened that gave you a pair that uses both in which both stitches are the same color. So I don't actually have a mistake in the row below, but I can still make a color change here in the row below to show you how this could be done. So I'm going to imagine that this AB pair that I'm about to do here should have been a BA pair in the row below. So I'm going to make that happen by doing this. So the yarn isn't actually involved in this technique, so you can actually just slip up to it. We don't need any extra yarn for this. This whole thing operates on the fact that an AB pair and a BA pair use the same amount of yarn. So the first thing we're going to do is you can either hold the yarn out of the way or just have it at the back so it's not in your face. You can split the pair so that one stitch goes to the right hand needle and one goes to the left. So basically just slip one stitch over to the right hand needle and leave the other one on the left. Then you're going to use your left hand needle to go into the left leg of this stitch just below the stitch that's on the needle. Holding that on the left hand needle, you drop the loop and then you pass that back to the right hand needle again. The loop that was dropped, you can just sort of tease out a little bit with the needle, and now you have this loose floppy loop. Then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. You're going to use your right hand needle to find the corresponding loop of the stitch one below the next one on your left hand needle. Grab that, drop the loop that's on your left hand needle, and then pass this one that's on your right back to your left. This gives you two loose floppy loops on the needle. So what you need to do to switch which is used for which is you reach underneath the front one and scoop the back one to the front. You want to make sure that this is seated on the needle properly so that your rightmost leg is front and your leftmost leg is back. So it's seated, twisted properly. And before you do anything more, you're going to also grab the other loose floppy loop with your left hand needle. Again, checking to make sure that it's seated in the right direction. Then, now that you've got those held, you're just going to pass one stitch over and off. And then the same thing on the other side. And now we have a BA pair where there was an AB pair. And you can go ahead and work on top of that now. Now, if you notice mistakes further down, you can extrapolate that to longer distance, but I wouldn't recommend doing it a lot further down than 1 or 2. There is another method for fixing a mistake that is a long way down. I have a former student who once made a mistake and didn't notice for 300 rows. And he said, well, I want to fix that. And so he laddered down 300 rows and then crocheted back up. And there's a specific way of doing that called a vertical lifeline that he worked out. And I've put it in my book, Double or Nothing. So if that ever happens to you, you can do that. Although, to be perfectly honest, I would have recommended, had he asked me, that you just duplicate stitch over the mistake, because nobody will ever notice that. And you can save yourself a lot of headache. But some people just like to do crazy things, and I completely understand that. But frankly, I wouldn't risk a piece that I had just worked 300 rows on just for a single mistake 300 rows down. So we have 40 minutes left in this workshop. And I just want to take a sort of straw poll here because I am not going to need 40 minutes to get to the top of this swatch and show the bind off. And if there aren't any other questions popping up, it probably makes more sense to give you 15 minutes back out of your day and do the bind off a little early, as long as you feel like you've gotten enough out of the workshop. Certainly, I imparted to you all of the things that I expected to impart to you, but if there are other questions that bring up other things, I'm happy to talk about them.
Alasdair, it's Candace. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
When we started to selvage the 2 slip stitches at the end, it was, I don't know, on row 4 or 5. Should we have started that right from the beginning, or is it?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And actually, you can see now that I've done a fair amount of both of the things, both of the edges, you can really see the difference. If you were doing this as a an actual finished piece, I would recommend that you start the selvage all the way from the beginning. The very first row, you slip the last pair. So in a real piece, you'd end up with every last pair in the entire piece, there would be a slipped pair at the very end, starting with row 1. The only pair that doesn't have something going on is the very first pair. Note that here in row 1, nothing happened in the first stitch, the first pair. It's just a regular double knit pair. I tell people that this is because there is a cast on right here, and so you don't technically need to link the pairs together in order to get this part of the edge to be linked together. But the real reason is that I want to make sure that the instructions for the linked pair are the same all the way up. If you have slipped pairs in there, a linked pair worked here would not have a slipped pair immediately before it because it was just at the just after the cast on, which means that you would not need to have your knit through the back of the loop on that linked pair. And I didn't want to have to make the linked pair a variable thing. And so I simply leave the linked pair out at the very beginning, even in a piece where, where's that other chart? Even in a piece where I do have slipped pairs, see the very first one is still empty. So the very first row, you start with just a regular pair, but at the end of it, you slip one. And every time you have a slipped pair immediately followed by a linked pair, that linked pair is worked through the back of the loop. And so you get to the end of that row and there's a slipped pair, this linked pair is worked through the back of the loop. So yes, in general, you want to start your selvage right from the beginning. I don't typically teach it by default because A, I want to give you two options, and B, the selvage isn't necessary for you to learn double knitting. It's just a nice thing to have to give you a nice clean edge. And most workshops, if people are sufficiently advanced and you don't even have to be very advanced, but I have taught workshops with people who are rank beginners at knitting, and that slows the workshop down at to a point where it might not make sense to add in the selvage. But if people are generally fairly experienced in knitting, adding an extra technique isn't going to slow anyone down all that much. So it isn't necessary in the intro workshop to do it, but it is almost always something that I add in as a little bonus technique. So yeah, you can see the difference. The selvage is much, much cleaner, whereas the non-selvage edge tends to have these little lumpy bits as the stitches are smaller than larger than smaller than larger. And the reason that they're smaller than larger than smaller than larger is that half of them have a link that's worked into them, which pulls the stitch in a different way. And the other half are just more or less normal stitches. So this is a better edge to show it. You can see, whoops, larger than smaller than larger than smaller. And then selvages, which are all the same size. Get rid of the smaller stitch in the middle, and give you loops that are all the same size, all fairly uniform.
Thank you.
Sure. The other thing that you can do with a non-selvage edge is you can make color changes that go all the way to the edge. So you can color change along the edge too if you don't have a selvage. But in general, with a selvage, you because you don't have the opportunity to color change on every single stitch, it's every other stitch, and the stitches are twice as tall, you leave the color, you leave the edge the same color. And actually a really good example of that is this piece, where you can see that the edge stays the same color all the way up, regardless of what is right next to it. Some of those pairs are the same color as the edge, some aren't, but that first column is all the same color all the way up. Yeah, okay, it's upside down, but you get the idea. In a piece where the motif is further inside, it's not really all that big of a deal. It just matches the background in that case. Please pardon my cat if you can hear him on the mic. He's just realized that I'm in here and he's not allowed in while I'm teaching. I see something in the chat. Give me 1 second. Okay, so Meg has a 2-pattern question. And that is a bit out of the scope of this workshop, but I'm happy to answer it since I'm just knitting along here. So in 2-pattern double knitting, and this is a little preview of what goes on in that workshop, you do have the option of doing A, or B pairs, because there are cases where you're going to need A on both sides or B on both sides. The issue with that, of course, is that there are going to be cases where you have a lot of A in a row or a lot of B in a row, which is technically 1x1 ribbing. But it's 1x1 ribbing with a strand that runs in between the quote unquote layers at that point, although there really is only one layer of fabric, as all the knits and purls are connected. For example, if it's all A pairs, the B is going to run behind the knits and in front of the purls. And if you tug the fabric apart, you're likely to see that little strand of B. There's not much you can do about that except to play with your tension to make sure that the fabric isn't too tight and therefore shows the unused strand too much. And also think about the contrast between your yarns. If you've got very high contrast, you're going to end up with a much more visible B inside your A sections. That's just a natural effect of that. It's also just something that you have to learn to live with in certain circumstances with your with that style of knitting. There are going to be cases where you're going to see a sort of a shadow of the other, whatever is on the other side. And it's just a necessary evil in order to execute that style of technique. It isn't something that's really easily fixed. That said, I do have a 2-pattern workshop coming up next month with stitches. So if you'd like to come and take that, I'm not running one of my own for a little while, but I will have one coming up with stitches. Disregard what I'm doing right now. I'm prepping this swatch for a demo for something else that I need to do outside of this workshop. And in order to do that, I need some ends to weave in. I have had so many requests to make a video on weaving in ends. And so I'm going to do it. And I'm going to use this swatch that I'm making because it's got some nice long ends, but I need some extra ends to weave in. So I'm making them. So the other thing about that 2-pattern trick is that you want to make sure that any long strand that's running inside of your work is appropriately tensioned. It can be too loose or too tight. If it's too tight, it's going to distort your work. If it's too loose, it's going to have run the risk of sort of sticking out in odd places because there's too much slack on it. But again, that's something that I will talk more about in detail in a 2-pattern workshop. Okay, so that's the end of my swatch, and now I'm going to set up for the bind off. You can see there's a quote unquote mistake. This is the thing that I showed how to swap from AB to BA on. So to set up for a bind off, you just need one more row from one more row beyond what's in the swatch or in the chart. So I just went up through row 15 and now I'm going to do a row 16. It's not in the chart, but it's just one more row beyond what's in the chart that is the same color order as whatever you began it with. So here in this case, since I'm already past the motif, it's just going to be matching everything I have in the row below. But if you had a motif that went all the way up or some other kind of color work that went all the way to the top edge of your swatch, you just want to start with whatever color order you begin with and repeat that all the way across. That's the same way the cast on works as well. You start with one color order, and then you can, if you so choose, immediately start working in pattern right off of the cast on. The end result of that is that you have a slight image of one solid colored row at the very bottom, but everything beyond that is one is whatever color pattern you've chosen for it. For the bind off, if you do patterning all the way to the top, the bind off really does just or the color patterning goes right into the bind off. There's no extra row there. You can cast on in pattern. It looks terrible. Don't bother. Likewise, you can bind off in pattern. Same admonition. It's not worth it. It looks much, much nicer just to bind off in a single color order. So I'm here at the end of this prep row, and I'm going to work the last pair. The last pair would normally be slipped, unless you weren't doing the selvedge, in which case there's no difference between this row and what's charted. So then I'm going to break the other ends. Make it a little extra long here, because I'll be weaving them in later. So that row that I just did is, I call it a prep row, but in fact, it is in and of itself the bind off row. And so now that I've worked all of its stitches, I then slide the whole thing to the other end of my needle. Now here's the point where I said earlier, you're welcome to use circulars or straights. And the only place that it matters is if you are is when you get to the bind off. Here's where it matters. If you have straight needles, you can't simply slide your work all the way from one end to the other. You have to slip, slip, slip back until your needle point is sticking out the wrong edge of your work. Or you can do that last row onto a circular or DPN of the same size as your straights, so that you can just slide to the other side of it. So now my needle point is over here, my ends are over here, and I'm going to, I can't work these stitches, so I'm going to start slipping them. That's the only thing I can do with them. So I'm going to slip one knitwise, slip one purlwise, pass one over and off. Slip one knitwise, pass one over and off, slip one purlwise, pass one over and off. I'm slipping all of my knits knitwise and all of my pearls purlwise. And every time I have two on the needle, I pass one over and off. So it's the same as the simplest bind off, you know, except that of course it's in double knitting. And also you do the entire row first and go back to the beginning and reprocess it to finish the bind off. So why do I do it this way? Because I could have just done it with knit one, purl one, PSSO, knit one, PSSO, purl one, PSSO, etc. And I would have gotten a bind off with a similar looking edge, but in reality, what would have happened is that I would have ended up with a rather uneven edge. And the reason for that is the last two stitches that you've done at any given point in double knitting are both directly connected to the source yarn balls. Regardless of whether they're a knit and a purl or a purl and a knit, the last two stitches that you've done at any point are both stretchy like this. Unless you slipped them, in which case they're not technically the last two stitches that you made. Which means that if I tug on this, it's going to stretch. If I need to use this to pass it over this and off, it's going to stretch out of place as I do it. Even if I hold on to the base of the stitch, it's still going to stretch a little bit. Which means that after it's pulled over and off, I have to tug it back into place around the base of this stitch, which means I have to manually adjust the tension, manually adjust the tension of the bind off with every single stitch. So let's imagine that this were single layer knitting, the same way it normally would work. You'd be taking this stitch, and ignore the purls, this stitch, and passing it over this stitch and off. Note that this stitch doesn't move quite as readily, but if you tug on it, it will start stealing yarn out of this loop to get yarn out of the source yarn balls. On the other hand, if you go 3 back, this one is incredibly unlikely to manage to get any yarn out of the source yarn balls by stealing yarn out of both of these stitches. And the further back you go, the less that likelihood becomes. Certainly with particularly slippery yarn and needles, even the 3rd stitch might manage to get yarn out of the source yarn balls. But the 1st stitch, the very first one you put on in this row, will not be able to get yarn out of the source yarn balls, which means that every loop is going to be the same exact size and shape because it's based on the size of your needles. Which also informs the easiest way of adjusting this. If you find that the edge that you're getting isn't stretchy enough for you, for example, you can undo the bind off up until that point, undo the last row, and redo the last row on a needle size up, which gives you very slightly larger loops and therefore a very slightly stretchier bind off. Same general idea, if you want the bind off less stretchy, you can go a needle size down for that prep row. Because the end result is based on the size of the needles, you can adjust the tension of the bind off by changing the needles. So I'm going to keep going on the bind off and show you how it ends. Okay, so so here I am at the end. I've slipped the last 2 stitches, or I've slipped the last stitch from left-hand needle to right. I am not at this point going to pass this over and off. I'm going until I have 1 pair left on the needle. You should notice at this point that the pair stretches in and out. If it doesn't stretch, it means you slipped the last pair rather than working it. This is easy to fix though, because your ends are right here. All you need to do is undo this last PSSO, knit 1, redo the last PSSO, purl 1, and you should be back to this, this place where I am now. And so now at this point, all you really need to do is stretch them to a point where you can reach through them, reach through both loops, grab both ends, pass them together through both loops, and tighten. And if you find it isn't perfectly even, you can tighten each one individually too. even out the corner. So there we go. There's our little swatch. You'll notice that the bind off is reminiscent of the cast on. You get the little peak of the other color visible there and there. And if you stretch it, you notice that both the cast on and bind off are quite nice and stretchy, but not quite as stretchy as the rest of the work itself. And in animal fibers, as I mentioned before, you stretch it out like this, it just snaps right back to the original form, more or less, which cotton wouldn't do. So there we go. That's intro to double knitting. And I'll switch back to here to give you a proper goodbye. Yeah, if you've got any last minute questions, we do technically have a little over 10 minutes left. So if you've got any last questions, I'm happy to answer what I can. I do not currently, as I think I mentioned earlier, have workshops beyond this scheduled. I'm planning on getting some. I had some weird website issues, and they sort of took up all the time that I was going to use to figure out my my workshop planning. Now that those are mostly out of the way, I'm going to try to get some workshops into the schedule for May. Meg asks, how do we weave in the end? Since I've been mentioning it, and of course, I don't happen to have a tapestry needle with me, but I will tell you, and I will also say that that I am about to shoot a video on this. So I do a podcast on a semi-regular basis. I'm trying to get more regular with them. At the end of each podcast, I do a technique of the month. That technique of the month this month is going to be weaving in ends, and each of those techniques of the month gets split off into an individual video and stuck up on YouTube after the podcast is out. So so that said, I will be actually using this exact sample to demo this on video. But I'm not going to do it right now because A, I want to save these ends for the video, for that video, and B, I don't have my tapestry needles right here. So I will explain that double knitting is hollow, as I showed you earlier, and you can actually separate out the two layers, at least up to a point. At the points where the colors change, you get this connection between your layers. Those sort of pinch points are really great for feeding yarn through. You can use them as fulcrums too, to sort of, so basically you take one of these strands, or both of them if you want, put them on a tapestry needle and feed it into the work, and feed it up diagonally through a bunch of color changes, and then back in a different direction, and then in a different direction. You can loop-de-loop-de-loop around it if you like, and it will, as it goes from here to here, and then from here to here, the color changes here and here will act as a fulcrum and allow the yarn to get anchored in around this point. And then back in this direction, if you change direction again, it will anchor in around this point. And so the more of that kind of thing you do, the less likely it is that those ends are going to come out. Then when you get to the end of whatever you're doing for weaving in ends, you bring them out to the front, you snip them, and then you just give the work a little tug and it sucks them inside, and they're gone. If your yarn is grippy enough that you know, you don't need to do anything more than that, that's really all you need to do. There are some other little tricks, such as using one of the ends for a duplicate stitch, which I have conveniently added myself a stitch that I need to fix as a duplicate stitch. So I will do that in the video. So yeah, doing a duplicate stitch with one of your ends is an extra anchoring method That's especially helpful, excuse me, if you have particularly slippery yarn that's not as likely to just sort of grip onto itself. So hopefully that's enough to at least get you started with the idea. But stay tuned on my YouTube channel. I will have a demo of it soon. I don't normally demo it in the in this workshop, so it's not like I'm skimping on techniques here. It's just I don't normally demo it here, but I will very soon have a video of it.
Thank you for watching this video. Feel free to come back anytime and use it as a reference as you expand your double knitting knowledge and repertoire. I intend to release more of these recorded virtual workshops, as well as more and more advanced tutorials on double knitting in the future. If you want to be notified on when those drop, please subscribe to this channel, or join my mailing list, or visit my blog. If you feel so inclined, please consider dropping a tip at my Ko-fi page, linked below, if you'd like to offer more regular support to my continued development of double knitting techniques and help ensure more of these videos are forthcoming. Please consider joining my Patreon. Higher tiers also get free patterns and downloadable versions of my videos. If you're interested in my books or patterns, digital copies are available on Ravelry and elsewhere, linked from my website. Depending on when you view this, physical copies may still be available. Thanks again, and stay adventurous.